Welcome to the Pick Up the Flow show. I'm the host, Salwa, and today my guest is Sam Clarke. Hi, Sam.
Hi, nice to be here, Salwa.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you here. How are you? How's everything?
It's good. It's a beautiful day. I walked here. It's amazing to have like this interview space in New York. It's like something I feel like is missing, you know.
Oh, thank you.
It's nice to be able to talk at length, so I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Before we start the conversation, can you introduce yourself for those who may not be familiar with your work?
Yeah, so I'm like, I'm from Wisconsin, from Madison, or like a small suburb from Madison, and I moved to New York in 2012 to go to SVA to study photography. So that was really like the impetus for coming here. But yeah, growing up in Wisconsin was, it was sort of a dry experience, like always craving like, really deep musical moments. And I feel like I dove as deep as I could while I was in high school. And then like the entire time I was sort of aware of all these things that were happening in New York. And so both going to school here and studying photo and then immersing myself into like music scenes was like really two things that like brought me to New York. And so I've just kind of been here ever since, interacting in various ways and making images, now DJing, throwing parties, starting a radio platform, Dust and everything. So I don't know, it's never really been one thing, but that's what I do.
Nice. So when you were in Wisconsin, like, what were your aspirations?
I think like my aspirations were just like, I was so driven by music and the potential for music to like connect people and create experiences and bring things together. And at the same time, I also had like an interest in photography and making photographs, and everything sort of coalesced and came together for me when I went to Lollapalooza for the first time in Chicago. This was like 2008, I think.
Wow.
It was like Radiohead, Nine Inch Nails,
Wow.
Rage Against the Machine. And so it was like this moment where like all of this music that I had been listening to online, in message boards and whatever, like in my bedroom by myself, like in a suburb where I didn't really have the ability to relate to people. Suddenly I'm in like a crowd of like 50, 60, 70,000 people. And it's like, whoa, like it was the first time that I felt like I wasn't, like alone, like alone in the world. And the potential for that and being immersed in that was really what drove me to want to move to a bigger city. And also I brought a camera there and I was just making images of the festival and just taking really shitty photos of the bands performing. And I think it just ignited this passion to just be a part of that.
Wow.
But somehow Chicago just seemed too close. I had to come to New York,
So when did you come to New York?
It was 2012.
And
so I would have been 18, and I came to go to school. Yeah.
Wow. Because of like your interest in photography, so at that time you chose to study photography, or?
Yeah. I chose to study photo because it seemed like there was potential for it as like a career. Mm-hmm. Of course, there is a potential for it as a career, but it was an interesting time to, I think, start studying photo because it was something that was changing so much as like a medium and how you relate to the medium. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I started in 2012, like people weren't sharing work on Instagram, people weren't engaging with Instagram in a professional way. And as my undergrad degree went along, it was just the way in which we engage with our professional careers, the way in which we make contacts, and the way in which we, I don't know, see our, even just like share images and see images just change so rapidly. But all of my professors at the time were so old and had clung to this like really rapidly outmoded idea of like how to build a career as a photographer. And so I felt like it was a weird time, because it was very obvious to, I think, a lot of us that, you know, the landscape was changing like right in front of our eyes. So I came here to study photo, and I think like the real education came from like the city and came from online experiences rather than being in the classroom, as it were. So
yeah, I feel like it's something that many of us had as an experience with like
for sure
those institutions, like with the education in the US. But did you have like people you were influenced by at the time, or like people who you like people that you saw as your heroes in?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I was in high school, you know, my access to culture was very limited, but I would find it in funny ways. Either it was like on the internet, or it was like, I mean, one funny example is like, back in the day, like when American Apparel was like super, you know, influential and super popular, like I would go into the store like downtown, and they would have like a selection of this magazine called Butt Magazine. It was like a gay interview magazine, you know, like, and it had photography that was very bare and very frank and very like sexy, but also like almost like it was like elevated, you know, smut magazine. You know, it was tasteful, and a lot of the photographs from the beginning of that magazine were made by Wolfgang Tillmans.
Whoa!
So and that's like where I sort of discovered his work for the first time, and I was really inspired by the way that his career was sort of navigating these like interview spaces, making photos of like other artists and creatives, and at the same time, like, you know, I found books of his and saw the way that he was interacting with and like making worlds out of photographs of small moments, big moments, whatever, approaching it from such a freewheeling and expansive mindset. And I think like he was someone that was like really influential to me, maintaining like a really like beautiful, rich, fine art practice, but then also like making beautiful portraits of his idols and of younger artists than him. And I really loved that.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm kind of doing now to a certain extent. Maybe, you know, I'm not exhibiting, but I do love like the experience of like making images of other artists, and that's sort of what I've been doing ever since I moved here.
Yeah, and I feel like you've been doing it with a lot of artists, and
you were one of the I photographed you a long time ago.
Yeah, with Nico. Shout out to God Plus for Toto Kaelo, and I feel like your photography. Like, would you describe your like? Do you have like a style or aesthetic, or like is there one word that you think would describe?
I don't know. It's like, I think it's always been like a sort of like nebulous idea of like what it is like I want to, like the aesthetic or like the ideas that I'm chasing within photo. I mean, I've always like really when I started making portraits of artists was at this really funny time in like 2014 or so, when I forget what they were calling it at the time. Like there was like this group of artists like Total Freedom and like non-records, non-worldwide, like Chino Mobi and Kisi and Angel Ho, and then people like Alicia Crampton, E+E, and you know, like these artists who were like approaching making sounds from like a really hyper visual, sample based, like referential perspective. And so, you know, you'd have like sirens swirling, and you'd have like swords like being unsheathed in like the track, you know, and like these really visual sounds. And so I was always trying to make images that somehow were creating like a really fluid, like musical feeling, you know, like had like compositions and textures and references that like somehow like tied itself back to the music. And I would do this through like, you know, layering like textures over images of like the artists that I was photographing as maybe like a naive like approach to trying to like make the images like look or sound like the music that the artist was making, which was sometimes successful and sometimes not. But yeah, I think like I've just, at the end of the day, like I've always had the desire to like make images of artists and of other people that they felt seen by and felt made them look good or feel good, or created a world for them that they felt represented by. So every time I photograph another artist, it's very much like a collaborative conversation, you know.
So can you walk us through like the process? Like for instance, do you have like one memory of like an artist that really enjoyed working with? And
I mean, one of the first ones was Ashland, Total Freedom. He goes like by Bobby Beethoven now. But I photographed him. It was like in 2014. I think I was like 20, 21.
Wow.
Like I had been doing some stuff at the time for this old music channel on Vice called Thump. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah.
He had just like seen, like Ashland had seen my work and messaged me on Facebook randomly and was like, I really want you to photograph me for this resident advisor feature. And it was crazy for me at the time because he was like one of those DJs or one of those people who I really looked up to, because I had gone to some of the what was that party called? I'm blanking. He was doing parties with Venus X. I can't remember the name of it. Ghetto Gothic. Yeah, of course, yeah. I had been to a bunch of those, and I think like their style of DJing and how, you know, how just insanely textural and like inventive and noisy and like fun all that was like such an influence on me. And when he asked me, it was like,
wow.
Oh, you know, like I was such a baby at the time. I was like, oh, he's like the perfect person for me to like try out some of these ideas.
Yeah.
And so I photographed him at the new museum for like the opening of the triennial that Ryan Tricarton was doing at the time. And you know, it was there was like a really small window to like try to like make some photos happen. I just had me and like my flash.
Wow.
And like, you know, just exploring the museum while like guests were sort of touring it for the first time, and, you know, ended up with photos that like he's still sometimes uses to this day. You know, like I see him get tagged in like a show somewhere in like Thailand or something, and they're still like using that photo. But it really was, you know, I had done these techniques where I had photographed him through a window where you could see like the New York skyline in the background. Yeah. And then at the same time you could see his face kind of like blurred out behind it. And so it created these layers that like I thought was bringing itself back to the ways in which you know, he was doing the same thing with like CDJs, and that moment really unlocked like a lot of like other not opportunities per se, but like just unlocked my thought process as far as like how can I like make this interesting and try to like do some of the things that like I see some of these musicians doing, but with images.
Wow.
If that makes sense.
That's so cool, because like also like I really love your style, because it's not this cheesy photograph, you know, like there's always like thought, and I feel like a conversation that you're having with the artist. Like some artists are really shy, and I love that like you don't oblige them to like show their face like straight, you know, like it's nice that like you have room for conversation with each guest. And
that's been like I think like now even to this day, like people, like a lot of artists really come to me for that reason, because like I've created certain techniques and methods to obscure people's faces in like both like seductive and kind of like mysterious ways, where like they feel like they can show a bit of themselves without having to feel super exposed. And you know, I'm terrible at being photographed myself, so like I relate to this feeling when I'm photographing someone else, and so they come to me kind of like wanting me to create images for them, because people need, you know, press images and things like this for shows they play and for whatever else it's useful. But to create those images that both makes them feel like they're being taken seriously without having to be completely exposed, I think it's been a nice process, you know. I mean, my freelance career also has been much less commercial than it has been like a really personal experience. I mean, people hit me up either over email or like they DM me and, you know, get my number from someone that knows me or something. So, yeah, my freelance career also, you know, years ago when I was working much more for music publications that don't really exist or don't really hire photographers as much anymore. Yeah, like that, those experiences were, I think, much more influential to me than school ever was. School, or like where I went to school, was like still, I think, really held or tied to like a really sort of outdated idea of both the professional landscape of photography and also like the canon of photography, and like which photographers were, you know, the important ones and what's, I don't know, it was very it was really difficult to like find a professor that like understood like where the world was at and was still engaged with. I hope that's changed now, but it was I was really at a time when like the old guard was sort of like still clinging on, while like all these like new kids with completely different experiences and completely different understandings of imagery were coming in and really eager for their ideas to be taken seriously. And yeah, I feel like that's my experience being a photographer, being a person in New York has been way more influential than school. And I think that's been the case for decades and decades. Like, even you listen to like someone like Nan Golden talk about like, you know, how much her personal life has influenced her approach to photography. I mean, it's really all that. There wasn't anything in school that could have taught her to value like and empathize with like certain communities. And that's like really what informed her work and informed like the images that she would go on to make. So, but maybe I could have gotten, I don't know, more technical knowledge from school. I should have maybe taken that more seriously. I don't know if I could have made this whole setup.
No, but honestly, like I feel like sometimes when there's too much technicality, it becomes kind of blank. Like I feel like your work, because you know it's living, like you're out there, it feels alive. It's not this like facade, like surface level. I don't know, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, oh my God, I've had like multiple experiences like in, you know, in my career where like for one reason or the other, I've been forced to do shoots like in a studio. It's like my nightmare. Whoa. It's like I feel like I'm trapped or something.
A prison.
It's like a prison because I feel like my whole approach to making images is like reacting to either the subject or like my surroundings, and especially reacting to light and light as it's moving, light as it's interacting and reflecting off things. Like that is really how I like navigate a photo shoot, and it's always like this sort of walking conversation that I'm having with somebody as like we're looking at what's around us and seeing like, oh, like look at this right here, this looks so beautiful, like let's make a portrait in this like little moment that certainly is going to be gone in the next 10 minutes.
Wow.
And then I'll end up in a studio where like I have to like position the lights just in the right way to like make people look good, and it's like my nightmare. I'm like not good at it like at all. I always like find my way after a while, but like I'm like having internally like a panic attack because I'm like, what do I do with a white wall, you know?
It's so true. And I love like how you talked about, you know, like you have your client and you're together in this space, and it's kind of like a back-to-back, like to go back to DJing because you're also a DJ. So it's like, it's nice that like you give room to the person, and it's like, the conversation between you two. And I'm curious about like your experience as a DJ. Like, do you feel like your photography practice inform your DJing or vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, again, like my photo career, even like when I had first like started messing around with having a camera and bringing it to Lollapalooza, I feel like making photos for me was always like a tool for me to like get closer to music, whether it's like live music or making images with musicians or whatever. I've never really seen myself as a musician, and there's been times when I've like wanted to make music. I don't know if I can like handle another unprofitable hobby, to be honest. Like I think my life would kind of spiral out of control. But I just don't know if I've ever really seen myself as a musician. But I think after like, you know, 6, 7, 8 years of like living in New York and going to like hundreds of shows, hundreds of club nights, of all different genres and so many different spaces and all these things, like I had like amassed like so many opinions and perspectives on what I liked and like spaces I like to be in. And I think in the beginning I just started DJing mainly because I like wanted to, I don't know, like I had no career ambitions for it. I thought I was just going to be a photographer the rest of my life. I just wanted to like make mixes and create something, and almost like take some of the creative pressure off of photography in a way, like, and at the same time, like once I started like making mixes and I started interacting with that more, I saw like how that was, you know, even more creating conversations between people who would later become my friends and whatever, people that I would maybe play with at some point or host, you know. And so I realized at a certain point that like the creative aspect behind DJing was another layer that I could add to that experience that would ultimately create, I don't know, conversations with people that I felt I shared some perspective with. It was never really a career ambition. It was more, I think, like something that I told myself after a while, like, why not do it? It just makes me happy. It's like something that I don't feel like a pressure to make a living off of.
But also it goes back to like your child self, I feel like, because you loved so much music and you were seeking that. Yeah. But I'm curious, like, do you feel like your community was more coming from music than photography? Or?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, I had somewhat of a community in photography just by virtue of studying it in school, and there was a pretty interesting community of photographers, sort of in the Tumblr era, in the early Instagram era. Like there was like really fun conversations that were going on that were not in any way like professional, you know. Like we would like make little images of like things on the street and like post it on Tumblr, and it felt like we were kind of having a conversation with each other on like trying to like make, you know, images and creating a language out of them, you know. And that was really great for a while. I think the only thing for me is like I think as far as exhibiting goes and as far as being in like the art world, for example, I could never really find catharsis there. Like it always felt like such a highly professional commercial space, and I couldn't really find I didn't really feel like there was like a community for me there per se. Whereas like in music, it's like you could sort of like leave you could leave your job at the door and like arrive at the space, and like all you're really doing is like, you know, having a chat and dancing and like meeting people, and the ideal is to like be able to sort of, you know, arrive in a place where like music is really the only uniting factor, or like one of them. And so that's always been like what really pushed me to, or what always attracted me to music. And I don't really know like where you would find that with photography really, outside of like master's programs or whatever. It's
so true. And like are you like, because now you're DJing, you have shows coming up, is it something like, do you feel like it's something interdependent with photography? Like, do you feel like
what's really been really cool with playing well, I've really only just recently started playing shows abroad. I kind of just made like a little tour around Europe like last spring. I don't even really have like fans in Europe, but I have like, through the years I've just made friends in various places, and it was more just a nice reason to come to a place, put together a show around like me coming, bring some other people into it, and so it was very like low key and like intimate. But you know, in every place that I went, whether it's like London or it's Munich or it's Berlin or Paris or whatever, like I was approached both as like a photographer and a DJ. Like I would have someone hit me up, be like, oh, like I see you're gonna be in town, like do you have time to like do a shoot with me? And so it would be like this amazing little thing where like I'm I mean, like I'm having like an afternoon like photographing someone in like a city that I've never been in, and then at night I'll like go and play the show, and I feel really like gratified by like having the ability to connect with people in those ways. I also did like a tour diary. Like I brought this little camera with me and like photographed like people in outfits and whatever for this for Grailed, this like company. And so I made like a tour diary, and like this experience of like, you know, making images and interacting with being like a photographer while also being a DJ was really fun and exciting. I'm not really sure where that's going, but I'm kind of like straddling like both career ambitions, hoping to like merge them together somehow. I'm not really sure what it looks like yet, but
and also,
it's cool.
Yeah, because you've worked with a lot of artists on covers, you know, art covers.
That's my favorite thing to do. Yeah,
I have a few photos that like I'd like to show, and maybe you can
oh yeah, so this is so this is this label Massive Gain that's like based out of Oslo, run by my friends like Matthias and Eric. They go by Fake Dias and Unleash. And this label, I mean, has been, me and Matthias specifically have like had this like long-standing friendship that we both, in a funny way, we both like have like a symbiotic relationship to each other's creativity, where him as like a producer, someone who both makes, you know, like ambient and experimental music, but then also his ambition was always making techno that like is bringing together really visual, really like synesthetic sounds. And so he was always trying to like make images with music, and I was always trying to like conjure music with images. And so we had this kind of like fun friendship, and eventually when he started this label, it made sense that like a lot of this work that I had made in the past would get used for a lot of these. Like I didn't make it just for the release. They were images that I had had for years that I never really was able to find like a proper outlet for, because I'd never published a book. I never had like a proper, you know, gallery show with any of this stuff. But when we started this label, I reworked a lot of those images to become covers for these singles, and it became this like sort of, it brought like a lot of those images that I had made like a second life in a way. And it was a really great experience.
Wow.
I love looking at like everything, like all of the works as like a whole unit. I'm like, wow, we kind of built this world together, you know. It feels like very symbiotic.
But also I feel like you have like your signature. Like I'm like, okay, that's the Sam Clarke.
This is a newer one. Yeah. So it's like behind there's like an image of like a portrait that I made of him when we were in Ukraine together a couple years ago.
Wow.
So it's like a portrait that I made of him, and we didn't know what to do with it for the longest time. We thought it would maybe be like a press photo or whatever. And then, you know, a couple years later when we're like putting together his, it's really like one of his first like full-length records, trying to like figure out like what to do with it. And I took these like iPhone images that I had made of, you know, like Subway advertisements when they get like ripped off, and suddenly you have like 5 layers of like advertisements that are like shredded and have become like this like weird, like almost Jackson Pollock-esque collage thing. So I like just sort of layered images that I had took on top of this, and I think created something that like, if you listen to the record, it really feels like it represents like the sort of sonic like a collage, and the both like the lushness and the intimacy, but also the abrasive chaotic elements too. We both felt really gratified when this was finished.
Nice. But yeah, you've also worked with the Earth Eater.
Yeah.
Like, how did that happen? What was the...
Well, the thing with Earth Eater is really funny also because I just remember seeing her perform like years and years ago, like maybe like even 2012, 2013, when she was in this band called Guardian Alien, performing at like 285 Kent and like Death by Audio and places like this. And then she started releasing more of her solo records, and I was always a big fan of them. And she was also someone who, you know, you would see, you know, bartending at like Hollow or performing, you know, some like strange like DIY fashion show and stuff like this. Like I had always been like a fan of hers. And then through mutual friends, like she was putting out this record that was moving much more in like a pop direction, and she really wanted something that was going to bring that out.
Wow.
And so me and my friend Christian Velasquez worked on this series of covers together. He put a lot of like the creative direction together, which you know, were drawing references from like Aphex Twins, like Window Liquor covers, and there was like some various other references, but yeah, so we were just trying to like apply those to her and try to like, you know, very limited budget. Like it was really just the four of us and some other friends helping out that all really loved the music and like wanted to like make something really special. So we went to the beach, painted her body all white.
Whoa.
And then photographed like in front of the water, and it turned into something that I think was really transformative for all of us. Like it just was so much, it was like alchemy or something. It was so much greater than all of the individual elements. And by the time that photo was finished, I was like, whoa, this is like what I want. I want to keep doing this for a long time.
But you talked about like a creative direction, and is that something? It's something you do as well, and
yeah, almost like unknowingly.
Yeah.
Like I've never like considered it so much. I started to realize that I had been doing it with Massive Gain a little bit when I looked. I'm like, oh, the visual direction of like this whole label has been so. It's almost as if I had been looking at it from like the macro perspective the whole time, even if it was very incremental. And we both had like this very like shared idea of like what we wanted to say with like that visual element. And then when our radio platform Dust started, it presented like a new opportunity basically to like create like a whole visual identity again. And I was in conversation with a whole different group of people. My friend Stefan, DJ Valentimes, Doug, Compile, Will and Yoma and Julian, Federico, all these people, like yeah, it was like that moment where we were suddenly able to like create like a new aesthetic with each other. And our of course, like our really good friend Rose, who's now doing like creative direction for Playboy Cardi.
Whoa.
She was like tattooing out of our studio, and so she was around. And it's something that like an aesthetic that I don't think any of us were pre-planning per se, but just was born out of like the confluence of who's there. And yeah, you know, she made the logo. I just one day was like, it would make perfect sense if you made the logo for this, and we just threw it on the thing and it made perfect sense. And then, you know, Stefan had like all of these like really shitty Xerox machines that he would like insist we like, you know, basically fry every image with that, you know. And so all these like little both like technical and creative ideas kind of came together to form this shared language that we had that became very easy to churn out, like once we were understanding what it was. And yeah, doing the creative direction was great for that, because it seemed like people really connected to it, and it became really quickly identifiable.
But also I feel like because it was during COVID, and that was the thing of New York, like
yeah,
if you weren't at this, like it was such a special, like unique cultural moment in New York that kind of defined like that era,
little period. Yeah.
And also like Europe had eyes on this. It's crazy how like what you created with the, you know, all those people, Doug and Will, and it was so it's New York. It's like
it's funny because it was very classic New York in a sense. Like even the location being like on the water on the East River, like where all of these other DIY spots used to be like a decade prior. It just felt like this, like, you know, along with Chaos Computer and everything, it felt like this just like sudden resurgence of like an approach or like a perspective as far as a DIY space and what it could be that like hadn't existed in a while. And what was great about it existing even for that short time was that it gave, you know, a lot of the younger people in New York who maybe hadn't experienced all those DIY spaces in the decade prior, like a glimpse into like what that could feel like. And that's what I think, like looking back on it, feels really special, because even if it was sad that it didn't last as long as, you know, we maybe would have wanted. I mean, I think we were exhausted by the end, but thinking back now, it's like I feel like just that moment having started and so many people having like experienced it creates like all these little seeds that I think hopefully in the years to come, other people will, or maybe even we will, like create something new that brings that back together, because it is something that existed so far outside of like the club landscape in New York, which is really the dominant way people are experiencing music right now. And those spaces just aren't really accessible to everybody. They're not spaces that I think a lot of people can identify with as easily. So yeah, I think it was special. Yeah.
Nice. And you also run Nausea, and can you talk about that, like your experience?
Running the party series. Yeah. So Nausea kind of came about at the same time as us, or maybe just before. I mean, basically we were just handed like the Chaos Computer people, that whole group. A lot of them had been a part of the glove prior.
Can you tell quickly, like, what was Chaos Computer?
Yeah, Chaos Computer was just a really classic DIY space that was so they were in the floor below Dust, but they had been looking for a space for a couple years at that point, and they like finally found something. It was like owned by this man who had already known that like the building was going to get demolished. And so he was basically just like taking our money and like letting us kind of do what we wanted for a little while, you know? But so they, created this amazing little box where they really prioritized like experimental shows with lots of like queer and like non-white, like both bands and like and producers and sometimes it was clubby, sometimes it was just like whatever the fuck, like it was, you never really knew what you were going to walk into when you went in there, but it was always prioritizing accessibility, I think. Being a space where no one was turned away for a lack of funds, I think automatically creates a space where certain people feel like they are safe. safe to hang out and like not be bankrupt by the end of the night kind of thing. And so once they found the space, they needed someone else. They needed a different group of people to take the space that was on the floor above them. Because it was like this shitty apartment basically, but it was huge.
Yeah.
You know, with like 180-degree windows overlooking the skyline. And it was like $4,500 a month just for that floor. But it's just like, you couldn't imagine like what idiot would like rent that out as an apartment. It was a shithole, but it was beautiful at the same time.
Wow.
So it just worked. We thought we were just gonna make like a shared studio space for the for the 7 or 8 of us, but they basically let us throw shows like a couple times a month, you know, as like this sort of symbiotic relationship that we had with them, with Chaos Computer. And so me and my homie, Stefan, who goes by DJ Valentimes, we seized the opportunity like immediately. And we were like, okay, we had been talking about doing a rave series and we just didn't know what we were going to do with finding a space. And suddenly this came about out of nowhere. And, you know, immediately we just put like every last Saturday of the month into the calendar until like November. And so Nausea was like a product of that, really. We just put it in the calendar and then started to like figure out like what it was going to be. And really what that was bringing together like a bunch of friends that we had around the world, whether it's on the West Coast, in the Midwest, over in Europe, and creating a space in New York where they could finally sort of get taken seriously for the first time, because there's so many producers that we're never going to get booked at Basement, we're never going to get booked at Nowadays, but had like a lot of fans either from SoundCloud or Bandcamp or the underground and whatever that would come to those shows. And we wanted to be the ones that could really put it on with good sound, you know, with attention to environment, and really give people the chance to experience some of these producers in the way that they should, you know.
Yeah, speaking of other radio projects, like you've been at Horror Radio. I don't know how to say it. I don't know, but it's
Horror,
like
in
really Berlin, sure. And you can you talk a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, quickly? it was a crazy situation. I had already been booked to like do a set there, and I had a lot of respect for what they were doing. I mean, they, you know, in the span of like a couple years had amassed like just such an amazing audience. Wow. You know, you go to like their YouTube, and you know, whether it's like a big DJ or even like a pretty like unknown DJ, you know, there's thousands and thousands of listeners and really active comments, and a lot of people getting taken seriously and receiving both praise and criticism. I really had a lot of respect for what they were doing, and I was excited to go play. And I had heard maybe like a week or so before that there was like some incidents where they had sort of censored other artists for showing solidarity with Palestine, and they've been sort of vague about it being censorship or whatever. But I mean, they stopped sets by people who were like bringing in, you know, big Palestine flags. Someone who I knew, Matriarch, she's a DJ in Copenhagen. They were doing like a little pop-up in Copenhagen, which apparently is a very strongly pro-Palestine city. There's a big support there for that movement, and so I felt like I had some responsibility as someone who has been thinking about and educated myself on this subject for a few years now, it's like I feel like I had some responsibility to remind their audience of like what was going on. You know, I didn't want to go on there and simply just ignore. I mean, this was maybe a month after October 7th, so I didn't want to go on and ignore what was happening, and especially because it was unsure about like what their politics were, and I played for, you know, I got there and I played for maybe like 20 minutes. I think I was playing for like 20 minutes, and I had just a shirt that read, it said Palestine in Arabic, and then it had the historic map of Palestine like right in the center with like the Palestinian flag imposed over it. And for me, it just, at the time, like it just didn't really seem like something that was like altogether that controversial, mostly because it's a t-shirt.
Yeah.
You know, I had bought that t-shirt with an Israeli friend of mine who also spoke a bit of Arabic, so I knew what it said, but it was really surprising that they decided to take me off air for the fact that it was deemed controversial because that symbol you know, supposedly represents, you know, a violence or like the eradication of Israel by virtue of the flag covering the entire state. So they came in and they told me like, their attendant said that the owners told me that they had stopped the stream and they wanted to have a conversation about my shirt's meaning, because they were unsure of what it said and were worried that it was, you know, violent or whatever. And yeah, I felt really offended by that. I felt really offended that they had stopped my set in the middle of playing and had the audacity to tell me that I could maybe restart my set after I had explained myself, when, you know, I still hold the opinion to this day that there's nothing controversial about the shirt that I was wearing, you know. So I just decided that I wasn't going to restart. I didn't really want to have a conversation with them either. I've since tried to have communications with them, but really it's like I had no ambitions to go on their radio and dismantle them. I just wanted to keep a dialogue with their audience, but by virtue of them inserting themselves and censoring that very basic gesture, it created, I think, something that was so much bigger than what I had intended for it to be. But, you know,
like, what's your opinion on like the internet? Because I feel like a lot of people started to retweet you or post the stories. And
I mean, on some level, I felt there was a lot of solidarity. Like, I mean, well, my stories on Instagram are usually like 500-600 views. I woke up the next day and that story had over 10,000 views.
Oh my god!
Which for me is like, it's terrifying, you know. Like I don't really like want, like I just don't. I don't know. Like I'm not used to that. I'm not used to like engaging with that many people. You know, there was thousands of people that were like tagging me in like reposts, and you know, a lot of them were very supportive. Like I did feel like there was like people really understood like why what happened was fucked up, and like why we deserve more out of platforms that are seeking to represent our creativity. But then at the same time, I've had hundreds of people in my DMs like raging, just calling me a Nazi, you know, calling me a Nazi, calling me, you know, saying that it was like, you know, I think a lot of people think that like boycotts, especially when they're not, you know, they're not directly targeting the state. I think people don't really understand like why boycotts are necessary, why cultural boycotts are necessary, and like why it is a tool for, you know, artists and creatives to make a difference in the world that is right in front of us. I mean, yeah, like I can't do anything to stop Joe Biden or stop Netanyahu from doing what they're doing, but like one step that we can make is making sure that like the institutions with which we engage with and which represent us and which we which give us platform are aligned with our ideals. And I think that has like a chain effect, or at least I hope it does. Because there's not a really whole lot of other things that we can do to affect that sort of change. And so if those changes can happen on that small cultural level, I mean, hopefully that makes a difference as far as like how we accept the political realities that are happening, you know, because I think a lot of people weren't caring for decades, you know.
Do you feel like your opinion on certain people who have been silent changed? Or
yeah, certainly. I mean, at the same time, like I think it is really frustrating to like witness silence. And there were so many people that were really attempting to silence me in this moment, because I feel like so many people are looking at me thinking like, oh, you're just some fucking American, like what do you know about this? You know, like what do you, like you don't know, like speaking to me as if like, despite them making assumptions about like what I know about this issue, as if like needing to know the intricacies of the Oslo Accords and knowing like, you know, Yasser Arafat's like life story is like a requirement for knowing that like what's happening right now is wrong. Like I just don't believe that's true. And I think a lot of people have been vocal, though I do think there's like this barrier with this conflict. I think there's this barrier with this conflict of like the intimidation of like the knowledge of what this history is. And I don't want to fault people for being like overly silent, though I do like find it more problematic when people break when people know that like interacting with like certain institutions and things is wrong and do it anyway for opportunity. I think that's like a different level of things. I don't know. It's like it's something that I think like a lot of us are learning how to interact with in real time, and I do try to like make some sort of space for people that don't really know how to navigate it yet. But I think it is important to just stick your neck out and try, you know, especially because I think it's always like the smaller artists with like much more to lose, and that are the first ones to do it. I think if I were to be frustrated with anyone's silence, it's certainly
the big artists,
the bigger artists that have like more influence and more ability to, I think, navigate controversial topics without losing their careers, you know. And I think there has been some artists that have done a great job with that, and many more that have not, but it's neither here nor there, you know.
And to end this amazing conversation, what's next? What can we expect from you? Do you have any upcoming projects?
Yeah, I mean, so we're with Dust, with the radio, even though we don't have a physical space anymore. I think we're going to be trying to do some nomadic events, you know, doing little pop-up events in other cities and engaging with artists that we really love in other places until we maybe potentially find a space in New York again, but who knows? I'm playing some shows in Europe in the spring, in March and April. That should be a lot of fun, and I'm sure there's a lot of other projects that are coming that I hope will coalesce the dissonant aspects of my work and my creativity, but I'm remaining patient. I'm remaining patient. I'm not in a rush for success or for anything at this point, really. I'm just having fun meeting people and engaging with my creativity even in moments that feel uncomfortable, I guess. Well, thank you so much, Sam. Thank you for having me. Yeah, this was so nice. And
Yeah, I'll make sure to include all of the links and also your SoundCloud, and people can find you on Instagram as well. And you're playing Berlin. You're playing Tresor.
Yes, I'm playing Herrensauna at Tresor on the 31st.
Nice.
Which should be amazing, I think. It actually just got announced today, so they're like, again, like one group of artists, or one party that I feel like maintains really solid ideals, and I'm really excited to be back playing there.
Well, that's exciting. Well, thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you so much, Ella.